Hello and welcome to Endolivka Jewellery. My name is Lauren and I think it's about time to talk about Dracula and the Abbey. So I first had an idea for a Whitby Abbey themed collection last summer. While I was making my final project for the Silver Diploma, I made an Iceland themed tiara, and I loved the idea of making a piece inspired by a place, which was actually the suggestion of my mentor last year. She said it should definitely be Iceland inspired. And Whitby has always been my favourite place. It's somewhere that I was actually planning to move to in my early 20s, but I just, through a twist of fate, ended up in Iceland instead. And last summer, I actually went to Whitby for the first time since I moved to Iceland, and still love it. And while I was there, I was just like, I would love to make a Whitby Abbey inspired collection for my final project for the Fine Diploma. I knew I wanted it to be the architecture of Whitby Abbey, and in particular, there is one window there that has always captured my imagination. It's like an arch window, but it is ruined in such a beautiful way. I actually didn't end up using that window because the other two windows aren't as ruined as that one. I'm still definitely going to do something with that window in the future. But so I still did the arch window, but it was intact. It wasn't ruined like that particular window is. And while I was in Whitby, I also started reading Dracula. I've always enjoyed Dracula. Growing up with spooky parents, I've always had like an affinity for the macabre. But I realised I'd never actually read the actual novel all the way through. As a kid, I'd read shorter, like child-friendly versions, and I knew the story. I'd watched, films and TV shows and things. I knew the story, but I'd never read the actual full novel. So I did that then, and I loved it. I became a bit obsessed with Dracula over the last year, honestly. I've read the original novel. I have listened to a podcast repeatedly, which is like a radio play that's a slight adaptation of Dracula called The Woes of Whitby. I've listened to actual Dracula radio play. And I've also read the Icelandic version of Dracula called Powers of Darkness, which is actually a different story. It was only discovered 10 years ago to not be a direct translation. And when I make these kind of conceptual storytelling pieces with a strong theme, I like to really niche down on what my concept is. So it couldn't just be the architecture of Whitby Abbey. And one day when I was at work, I was trying to think, what could the really niche down version of it be? And I thought I would love to include Dracula somehow in the collection. I've always thought that I would rather fail making an ambitious piece than successfully play it safe. So if I was going to go for this, I was going to really, really go for this. And what I decided on was having, I think a poison ring was the first thing that popped out in my head as that would be a really cool, kind of spooky-ish piece of jewellery to have in the collection, maybe like a signet ring with the rose window. And then I thought, hang on, how about inside that signet ring, inside the poison ring, there is a scene from Dracula. And that's how I came up with the concept of 3 lockets, each containing a scene from the novel. And I decided that I wanted each scene to maybe have some connection to Whitby, or maybe be something to do with Dracula directly. And in the end, I decided that I wanted to make each piece to be dedicated to a character who died in the novel, and have a scene connected to them and connected to their death. So I decided straight away that I wanted Lucy Westenra, one of the main characters in the book, and I wanted her going up the 199 steps, which is where she first, meets Dracula when she's sleepwalking and when he first feeds on her. And I thought that would be a lovely Whitby themed scene that is very iconic, the 199 steps and then Lucy at the bottom. But I couldn't decide what the other 2 characters were going to be. I thought maybe the wreck of the Demeter, the ship. It's not a super well heard of scene. A lot of people don't know about that scene unless you know the story well. But last year, a film came out called The Last Voyage of the Demeter, and I went to see that in the cinema. And it's about, it's the story of that ship's journey carrying Dracula to the UK. So that's coming more into popular culture, and so I thought that would be a good scene to have. And then the third scene, I had no idea what I was going to do. And what I decided was that I wanted the locket to open. On one side you'd have the scene, and then on the other side you'd have a quote connected to that character. And I think I decided for the pendant I was going to have the quote on the inside of the locket. For the bangle I was going to have it on the inside of the bangle. And for the poison ring I wanted to have it so that it leaves an imprint on your finger when you take it off. And I was trying to work out a way to do that. But in the end I decided that was too complicated. So I went down the route of Victorian mourning jewellery, and I went down this whole rabbit hole of researching this for months and completely fell in love with Victorian mourning jewellery. I bought some as research. And I, listened to the lectures from the art of mourning, and it's been wonderful actually learning about that whole style of jewellery through researching for my final project. And through that, I was thinking, okay, Victorian mourning jewellery. So I'm going to dedicate each piece to that character as like a piece of mourning jewellery. And then I thought, what if each character's death had a connection to Whitby? Because Renfield was a character that was really jumping out to me, but he's not connected to Whitby in any way. Lucy is, because Lucy, she doesn't die in Whitby, but her health declines in Whitby. The captain of the Demeter doesn't die in Whitby, but his body is found in Whitby. And then I was trying to find a third character whose death is connected to Whitby, and I was trying so hard. Had to keep looking in the novel again to try and find someone else. And there's actually one character whose name is actually taken from one of the gravestones in Whitby Cemetery in real life, Mr. Swales. And he is a born and bred Whitby man in the book, and he died in Whitby and was also killed by Dracula. So there we have 3 deaths, all connected to Whitby and all killed by Dracula. And actually all of their deaths are very close to Whitby Abbey. So the beach where the Demeter shipwrecks in Whitby is the little beach that's just at the bottom of the 199 steps, Tate Hill Beach. Lucy goes up the 199 steps to meet Dracula, and Mr. Swales is found dead in St. Mary's Churchyard, which is at the top of the 199 steps. And what was quite funny, when I was researching the Victorian mourning jewellery, I was trying to work out what symbolism I should include in these pieces, to make it really mourning jewellery. And each scene just happens to have some of the symbolism that was used in mourning jewellery. So you had a staircase, and that was used in jewellery as a staircase to kind of heaven. You have the graveyard, and tombstones were a common theme in Victorian mourning jewellery. There was normally a widow crying in front of the tombstone in the scenes on the jewellery, and the shipwreck and ships were also used as symbolism in mourning jewellery. So that was just a nice coincidence, but it happened to tie in with the theme quite well. I decided that I wanted to use black enamel. That was the plan originally. As a lot of mourning jewellery has black enamel. I used to work as an enameller. I love enamelling. Don't do it enough. Haven't done it in a while, so I was planning to do it in this. I wanted to do filigree, which is also a common theme in Victorian jewellery, and put some more of the symbolism in the filigree. I wanted to use seed pearls as the little openings for the lockets, a little handle to open it, because seed pearls represented tears in mourning jewellery. And I really, really wanted to get some Victorian Whitby jet to include in the jewellery somehow. And I planned to get some Whitby jet beads, Victorian jet beads. But my condition was that they had to be broken. I'm not intentionally going to ruin a piece of history for my project. So while I was designing the project quite early on, I started listening to a playlist of the bands that are going to be playing at Whitby Goth Weekend this October, because I am going, so I want to know some of the songs. One song jumped out at me. So there's a band called Creeper. I've heard of them. I'd never listened to them before. And there was a song called Cry to Heaven, which I listened to. And from the first time I listened to that song, I was like, oh my God, this song is perfect. It's like that fits the theme of my collection. It was clearly about a vampire, and it is. Just the music, like everything about it was very inspiring to me. And the day after I found that song, I made a reel for Instagram of like hinting at what the collection was going to be about. Did not plan it at all. It was late at night and I was in bed and just had the song in my head, and I was like, just suddenly, I have to make a reel and post it on Instagram now. So I went on Canva, made a template. I loved how it turned out in the end. It was, the right font and just the timing. Everything about it was right. But a photo of the rose window at Whitby Abbey with a pendant I'd made in the same style. And my drawing, very bad drawing of Lucy at the bottom of the 199 steps. I just posted it to the Cry to Heaven song. And said, these are the clues. Can anyone guess what the collection is? Woke up the next morning to 2 replies. One person said stained glass, which I thought was a good guess. And, it was quite interesting to see what people's guesses were, because some of them were things that I would never have thought of, but they worked, And then the second one, I don't know who posted first. It might have been the first comment. Got almost exactly the name of the collection. She wrote Dracula and Whitby Abbey. And I didn't know what to do at that point. I was like, should I just say you got it, or should I just keep this real guessing game going? So I think I don't remember if I responded just good guess, or I just put an emoji of a vampire or something. And I kept this real thing going for the next few months, and it was a lot of fun. I decided early on that I wanted to do a lot of storytelling with this collection. And when I started doing that, I had a vision in my head that I wanted to be in Whitby and just kind of film these clips of me just turning around to face the camera from each location. But I had no plans to go to Whitby before the submission date. But I was going to the UK for 2 weeks during the summer and travelling around everywhere in the UK. We went to so many different towns, visiting friends and family. And my father-in-law and brother-in-law were going to fly out from Iceland to meet us in York for a weekend. So I just kind of slipped in a day trip to Whitby from York on the bus to kind of show them you want to see the British seaside as well, It's a lovely place. And I mean, they did enjoy it. So it wasn't, it wasn't just for me. They did really like Whitby. But I managed to film those shots while I was there for that day trip. And that was so awkward. So I've been doing YouTube for, I think, 4 or 5 years now. Not this channel, a different channel. I'm pretty comfortable in front of the camera, but I have never really filmed in public before. It was so awkward, just, asking my boyfriend, can you film this? And then just me clearly just posing and, in front of so many people. That was really embarrassing, but it was very effective. So I'm glad that I did it. But yeah, that was so awkward. And another shot that I really wanted to get, a kind of jokey one in front of Whitby Abbey, wearing this t-shirt, which, if you look through the clips, I wore this a lot while I was making the piece. It just says Dracula at the bottom. I wanted me in front of Whitby Abbey, kind of just, pointing at the shirt, just Dracula, the Abbey, Dracula and the Abbey, as a funny clue for the last video that I was going to release. And I got that one, and I'm really happy with that. And the plan was that I was going to wear this t-shirt for Whitby and get it a little bit in all of the shots that I was doing. However, while I was in the UK, before I went to York, I ripped my only pair of trousers that I had with me. I had dungarees with me, but my just regular jeans that I was going to wear ripped beyond repair. While I was there, I bought a cheap pair of jeggings before I went to York. They also got damaged beyond been wearable before we got to York. So I had to wear these dungarees. For the Dracula and the Abbey shots, I just kind of, just pulled down the dungarees and so you couldn't see the lower half of my body. But for the shots where I'm turning around, I had my dungarees on. And that was what a lot of people jumped onto when I was like, can you guess the theme? So many people were like, is it something to do with dungarees? So it is late April and I still haven't started my waxes, which I plan to have ready and sent to the casting company at the end of March. It is now a month later and I haven't started them yet. So I'm starting today. Today's the day that I'm officially starting the work on Dracula and the Abbey. So I have my Dracula book here ready for inspiration. And today I am going to be working on either the Lucy walking up the 199 steps or the wreck of the Demeter. I did these sketches today. I mean, I did the Lucy one over a month ago, but the Demeter I did today. And I think I'm going to start on Lucy because in my head that's going to be easier. But I guess we'll see how easy it's going to be. It's going to be difficult. But I think it's going to be easier than the ship right now. So I think I'm just going to start with that and get into it. Okay, so now I have put the design on, like the basic design, and I've kind of just carved away around the design so it's a little bit raised so I can see better what I'm doing. It doesn't look like much now and it's probably not going to focus. But yeah, I have here, it's the rough figure of Lucy. You can see the stairs winding around and there's a little bit where the lamppost is that I need to go into more detail. So now the stairs I think I'm going to do last. Maybe. I'm pretty confident that the stairs will turn out well. But the lamppost, I think that'll be okay. But Lucy is the thing I'm most worried about because I am not very good at drawing people in general. So I need to look up a bit more what I'm going to do for her. So I don't know, I might start on Lucy or I might start on the lamppost. I'm not sure. By the way, this is what the design will eventually look like. So it will be inside the arch window as a locket. And I've made this a bit bigger than I was planning, but I think it'll be quite nice to have a big statement locket. Okay, so I've done the lamppost a little bit, and even though it seems really counterproductive, I am going to use buff sticks to kind of buff down the top a little bit, just to see if I can get more detail in right now, because this piece of wax is very textured from when it was sawn into a sheet. So I'm going to try and just smooth down the surface a little bit, and then I can probably see what I'm doing a bit better. I prefer to make my master patterns for casting straight into metal because I personally find it a bit easier to work with. But I decided that was going to take way too long to do it in metal, so I should just do it in wax. In hindsight, that was a bad decision. Okay, so I just stopped for a bit, had a shower, got dinner, and I did a little sketch of what I want Lucy to look like. Don't know if it's going to show on the camera, but I just wanted to have loose kind of just the hair a bit of a mess, and she's wearing her Victorian nightgown. But I just realised possibly the first hurdle. So what I was planning to do was carve out the scene in wax and then make the actual locket itself in metal, because I find it easier to actually make my masters in metal, but this part would have been quicker in wax. And then send it, stick the wax onto the metal and then send it. But the casters that I intend to use like to sprue the things themselves when they're there, and I just realised that they're going to want to solder a sprue onto the metal locket, which they won't be able to if there's wax on it. And it is a Friday evening, so they are closed for the weekend, and I won't be able to ask them until Monday what to do. So I'm just going to carry on wax carving because I'll work something out anyway. Okay, so it's the next morning,
And this is where we got to last night. If it focuses. And I have decided that I am going to cast this as a separate piece to the locket itself, because I quite like this scene as is, and I'm going to just cast it as like a rectangle shaped pendant that can potentially sell on its own in the future. And then when the castings come for this piece, I will just saw out the scene and solder it into the locket. And what I've decided is I was originally going to have Lucy's dress like flowing just all the way down, but because I quite like this rectangle shape, I'm just going to cut her off at the bottom of the steps. And then that way also I don't have to deal with making the hands very detailed.
So I realised that I wasn't going to have time to cast the pieces, so I decided instead that I was going to use metal clay to kind of cast the waxes. So I used like a silicone moulding compound. So I put the clay in the mould and then had, a perfect copy, kind of. I'm not very experienced with silver clay. It's not my preferred method of doing anything. So this was also a learning experience. I was using PMC for the first time ever. I've always used art clay whenever I've used silver clay. I've never used PMC. I think it's been discontinued anyway. But while I was in the UK, my stepmom had a couple of packs that she'd never used and she asked if I wanted them. I love using that clay. It's so much nicer than art clay, and I'm devastated that it has been discontinued, so I'll never be able to use it anyway. But it was great to use. The first thing that I carved was Lucy Westenra. That piece, in my head, it was going to be the simplest, and it was. It was. I loved carving that piece. It was straightforward. Most of it was done in the first night. But after that, it went downhill. I lost motivation to do the wax carving for the other two very quickly. So I just kept putting it off and off and off. And because I was putting that off, I was also putting the actual metalwork off. What my plan was I was going to make master patterns in copper of each of the 3 lockets and have them cast so that I could enamel on the castings. That didn't happen. So to make the arch window, I kind of had to make it up a little bit. I did find a picture of a reconstruction of what the window or what the whole abbey would look like, and just zoomed in on the window to get like a rough idea, because none of the arch windows are intact enough to see, what it would have looked like originally. And so I had to make my own template. Drew it by hand. I tried drawing straight on the metal. And the first copper one that I made turned out so good until the last section of sawing, when I noticed that I'd made the last long window too narrow compared to the others and it was too noticeable. So I had to start again. And that time I decided to start with the biggest details first instead of like working on the outside first and then working my way in. I just did the big details in the middle first and worked my way out. That window turned out so much better. And I think I also did a third attempt. And then I had one that was good enough. I was going to solder that onto the back plate, but I kind of wanted to get in the quatrefoil section of the window. I wanted to get these little details that it had. So it's like not just perfectly rounded, it's got like a little point on it. So I decided to use a barrel fraser to like carve those little points. I got 3 points done really nicely, and then the fourth one it slipped and went wonky, like really bad. I did manage to solder in another piece of metal and get it to like an acceptable standard, like I carved it again and it was fine. And then I think when I soldered it to the back plate, something went wrong. I think it shifted out of place again or something. Yeah, so that didn't go well. Making the quatrefoil window was also difficult. I had to draw it straight on the metal and then cut out the quatrefoils, and they weren't quite even. Like, it was a lot better than the arch window went, but it still wasn't great. And then I got so demotivated that I stopped doing that as well. So I didn't do anything for a while. I was just researching the mourning jewellery, and then suddenly I was like, oh my god, the deadline is in like a month and I haven't done anything, really. Hadn't done the other wax carving, hadn't really done any of the metal work. So I had to get a move on. So for the frame of the bangle and the ring, I decided that I was going to do filigree because I love doing filigree. And I was going to have a lot of symbolism, so I started to make the bangle frame without knowing fully what the size of the locket was going to be because I hadn't finished the wax or anything. So it was a lot of like guesswork. It was like, it's roughly going to be that big, I think. I wanted to do like the quatrefoil from that window and like either side of the locket, but I wanted to turn them into flowers because there was a lot of flowers in Victorian mourning jewellery. I also made some ammonite shapes to go in a different part of the bangle to represent Whitby. And I was going to add lots more stuff, but I hated it. And I also didn't know how I was going to bring the pendant into the filigree theme. You know, maybe I was going to do a filigree bail or something, but I didn't think a bail was going to look good with it. And I didn't know what to do. And fortunately, it was terrifying at the time, but fortunately the bangle fell apart actually while I was trying to solder something. And so I just took apart all of the filigree and decided that I was just going to have the quatrefoil either side of the bangle. It was going to be easier. In my head it wasn't going to look as effective, but at least it was like a theme that I could tie together. So it's like the quatrefoil symbol in the bangle and in that window. Put them the same, like quatrefoil either side of the locket in the ring, and then in the pendant it was going to be in the chain, have some quatrefoils and maybe the clasp of the pendant as well. So that became the thing that tied the whole collection together, and I'm so glad it ended out like that because it looks so much more effective than what the filigree ever would. Lucy went great. Oh, that piece was wonderful. I had some trouble with the next two carvings. So the moulding compound for the Mr. Swales piece, the graveyard, something went wrong where I'd pushed the wax in when I was taking the mould, but then must have pushed it out slightly, so it took like a double print of everything and it didn't look good at all. So I had to mould again. And that mould was perfect. However, that was the last of my moulding compound. While I was trying to clean up that piece while it was dry, like before I fired it, I snapped off the end of it, and I had to I tried to fix it with just more clay, but I didn't leave it to dry properly. That was a very fragile section of that piece, and I had to try and solder it after I'd fired it, and I had to do so much filing and sanding it down.
I used a graver just to engrave some more detail onto the graveyard scene. I'm not very good with engraving, so this was experimental. After a few attempts of making the arch window in copper, I decided to just mark it onto silver and just not use a template, just cut it out, and it worked really well. For the chain, I made a lot of jump rings using a old drill bit as a mandrel. And yeah, this was a really long time. I was going to do a whole necklace of jump rings. I ended up not doing a whole necklace worth of chain.
So I looked online, I found a set of Victorian Whitby Jet mourning beads that were broken for I think £21. They were on eBay on auction, very cheap. The photos were not good, there was no description of the size, but I was like, they look good enough. Had them sent to my mum in the UK, went to pick them up. They were huge. They were way too big to use, completely unusable. I was devastated. I also, on eBay, got some other pieces where the seller had been like, I'm not sure if it's Whitby Jet or if it's French Jet, so I bought that collection of broken jewellery. It was all French Jet. And then finally, I searched for ages for another set of broken beads. Found one seller on Etsy who was selling a set of broken Victorian Whitby Jet beads. Never got them. Was in correspondence, I ordered them in plenty of time, hadn't been sent, asked for a tracking number, wasn't given one, she kept like palming me off, and in the end I was like, hey, I'm not getting these beads. They did finally arrive a few days ago. I ordered these beads in June. They arrived on the 5th of September. And also, they're not Whitby Jet, they're French Jet, so even if they'd arrived in time, wouldn't have made a difference because they're the right size, they're the perfect size, but I don't believe that they are Whitby Jets. What I did want was to have some glass or quartz cut into the shape of each piece, so like the arch window, the kind of square, and the round for the rose window, but I ran out of time and money and knew that I wasn't going to be able to get them. But I did manage to find an Etsy shop selling vintage watch glasses, and they were actually perfect. There was one that was like a square shape, one that was round, and then another one that was round but had like lines going to a point in the middle, which matched the rose window perfectly.
So it's now Thursday, and the project is due on Monday. I've got to send everything in. I still have to do the last wax carving. I still have to do all of the hinges. I have to do a lot of the metal work. Got to finish the chain, got to do the bangle and the ring. And I had 3 hours of sleep last night. I couldn't sleep. So I have pulled a sickie from work today. And we're going to try and get some stuff finished. Ugh.
I had still most of the metal work to do on all 3 pieces. Yeah, and I was very panicky. I also didn't have enough silver, either wire or sheet, and no time to order any more because I live in Iceland. I can't order things easily. There is one jewellery supply shop in the capital and it is not good. So, yeah, that was a lot of pressure because I couldn't waste any materials basically. I ordered some new moulding compound. And it was terrible. It wasn't the same brand or anything as what I was using before. And it came in 2 different types. I think there was like a harder one and a soft one. So I ordered both. I think I tried one of them first and it was rubbish. So I tried the second one and it was like a bit better, but it was still not good. It was so porous. The texture of that clay came out horribly. There was a lot of work to try and get some of that porosity off it. Didn't go well.
I made a frame for the arch window locket and it was a perfect fit. and then I had to saw that frame in half to make sure that both sides fit perfectly, and I was very careful and it went well.
So the first quatrefoils I made were out of jump rings. I hated it. It took so long. It was so much filing, it's just soldering to make these tiny fiddly little things. So the next ones that I made them out of sheet. It was so much faster. It was so much easier. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling tired, but successful. Well, successful.
Yeah, you finished your feet actually, yeah.
Yes, I did. Finished. Whoa, piece work.
This is Sirion's final piece for the silver diploma. Beautiful.
Thank you.
And we've been here over 10 hours today.
Mm-hmm.
And I am maybe halfway through.
Well, if you're halfway there, we can just be 10 more hours tomorrow and you'll be finished.
I'm going to die. Okay. Tomorrow is going to be a long day.
Yes, it will.
In January this year, I went to Whitby for a week for my 30th birthday. And as like a birthday gift to myself, I made a pendant and a pair of earrings in the shape of the rose window at Whitby Abbey. And that was kind of like my practice piece for making this collection. So that I could get the window, you know, that window in particular has a lot of detail in it. And the earrings are like tiny. And yeah, and I still managed to get all of the detail in them. So that was like my practice piece. And that really gave me the push of like, yeah, I can do this. I made the outer rims too shallow, so I had to keep soldering on layers and layers and layers of metal. But it worked in the end. And then I had exactly the same problem with the bezel setting inside the poison ring. The bezel was too high and the locket wouldn't close, so I had to solder more layers of metal on. Okay, let's do this again. This is now the 5th layer of metal to go onto the side of this. And I hope it'll be enough. It's just under 1mm thickness. When it came to soldering on the wreck of the Demeter piece, the clay was really thick again. It was even thicker than it had been for the Mr. Swales piece. I was filing and filing, but I was running out of time and getting impatient, so I decided at some point it's filed enough. It's still really thick, but it'll do. That came back to haunt me later.
So what just happened?
I was just polishing my piece, and then I heard a loud bang, like those indoor bombs on like New Year's and stuff, like bam.
Yeah.
And
like a party popper.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a party
yeah.
popper.
Mm-hmm.
Loud party
Yeah, like
popper.
a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was so out of place. And then I looked at you, and yeah, I had no idea what was happening.
So I was soldering the inner ring for the locket of the ring, the poison ring. And suddenly it was a loud, really loud bang, and the piece jumped into the air. And when it landed back, the whole back plate was warped, and I wasn't soldering the back plate, that was already soldered on. And I barely started heating the pieces, it wasn't that hot, and I don't know what happened. I've never experienced that. And I'm kind of scared to continue soldering at this point.
Can you imagine?
I don't know how to fix it either, it's bent out of shape. Okay, so after calming down and thinking logically about it, I think I know what happened. So the design in the middle, the metal clay piece, when I was filing down the back of that to try and get it all flat before I sweat soldered it on, there was one part of it near the bottom, which is kind of where the dent on the back is, that it was a really, really deep ridge into the clay. And I filed down as much as I could, without making the other part of it too thin, because that part was quite thick. But there was still quite a deep ridge in it, but it was quite narrow, so I decided to leave it and continue sweat soldering it onto the back plate. And what I think happened is that there was some trapped air inside that, and after soldering it so many times, because that wasn't me soldering the design on, that was soldering something else, I think the pressure of the air in that air bubble just finally gave way and exploded. So I know not to do that again. So I wanted to try and fix some of the damage from the implosion. So I drilled a hole on the back of the piece where the dent was, which was where the air bubble was, to try and relieve some of the pressure. And then I wanted to flatten it, but I wasn't quite sure how to. So I just used a ring mandrel as a punch and kind of gently hammered it as flat as I could.
I'm pretty prejudiced against binding wire because I've never really used it since I was like 18. Don't feel the need to use it, so I don't own any out of stubbornness. I don't have a lot of experience making lockets, and the hinges that I've done before are mostly quite big for like boxes. I don't have a lot of experience making tiny hinges, which these were. And I had no binding wire, so I decided it was a great idea to use copper wire to hold the tubes in place while I was soldering.
So Graham,
Yeah.
do you think this is a good idea? Copper wire holding it in place.
Interesting. No, I do not think it's a good idea. It will probably go on the wire, the solder.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But did I listen to him? And it worked. Until it didn't. The final hinge wouldn't solder on. So it wouldn't solder. When it did, it wouldn't go together. So it wouldn't, even trying to push it together, like bending it a little bit, it still wouldn't fit together. Then the hinge snapped off. So I had to solder it again. Still wouldn't solder. It did solder, but it soldered to the copper wire.
Do you think this is a good idea?
Interesting. No.
That happened twice in a row. I was running out of tube. Finally, it worked. But I have learnt my lesson, and I will buy some binding wire for next time.
I was getting towards the end of the poison ring when disaster struck again.
The glass ended up not fitting. The point was just too high and was hitting the back, was hitting the seam at the back. So unfortunately I couldn't use it, which was really sad because I wanted that. That was perfect for that piece. And because of that, I actually had to take out the setting and put a different setting in because the two round pieces were not the same size.
But fortunately, after that final setback, the rest of the ring went smoothly. Making the bangle was quite straightforward. I wanted an oval shaped bangle, so I used my round bangle mandrel just to kind of curve the ends of the bangle to make an oval. And then to rivet the hinge together, I just made a punch out of an old nail. I just sawed off the pointy end and used that as a punch to get down to the hinge and rivet it together. I would have liked to have the hinge along the whole edge of the locket, but I did not have enough tube or wire to do that. I finished assembling everything for the arch window locket. And then I blackened all of the pieces. I used an Impress Art black enamel pen, which isn't really enamel.
For the hair work, I searched for ages trying to find like a manual or a book or something with patterns of how to make the hair work, like instructions. There are some like Victorian books on like online libraries, but they just show you pictures of the patterns. There's no actual instructions, frustratingly. I contacted Goldsmiths Library. They said they couldn't really help. Searched online to no avail. So I had to just guess what to do. So I ordered some hair extensions, and yeah, I'd wanted to just kind of like weave it together, which in my head was going to be quite simple. It wasn't. So what I ended up doing was I glued sections of hair and like taped one side and then weaved hair through and just kept like this. So these glued sections, they were like stiff rather than like just hair flopping around everywhere. And it worked. So it took me a few tries to get it up to a tight weave that looked good. And then I just covered the back of the weave with glue to hold it all together. And then I just glued it onto a card that was like the size of the watch glass. Luckily enough, I just happened to have the perfect colour of cardboard for each piece of hair. I only have 3 different colours of cardboard lying around, and all of them were a perfect match. And I think it looks really effective, and it's definitely something I want to explore more in the future.
I absolutely love the hair work in these lockets, and I feel like it brought everything together. I did the beading for the chain very late last minute, and then the collection was ready. Here are the inspiration boards that I made for each piece, and I did include the quote that I was going to include in each piece on the boards.
Shadows in Whitby Abbey with the past. Dracula's whisper, spirits aghast. Like Mason's secrets beneath pallid moon in the abbey's echo, the mournful cries gloom. Victorian echoes, jewels of despair. Jet black adornments in night's cruel snare. Grief-polished crystal pressed to the heart from the darkness, clutching lovers torn apart. Mourning forever with sorrow's cold kiss. Tombs and abysses and...
So yeah, I got there in the end. I'm really happy with how the pieces turned out. They are not perfect. If I had an extra day, I would have loved to have soaked them in the pickle overnight to get a lot of the fire off it, basically. Yeah, there is more that I would have done. I would have definitely prepared myself better next time with having all the materials. I wouldn't have left it so late either. I say that, I definitely will this year as well. But yeah, I learned a lot on this, and I'm definitely not finished with this collection. This is something that I want to explore in the future. I love the theme of this collection. It's some, yeah, I definitely want to make more pieces for like an exhibition or something when I have time. It wasn't a complete success, but it also wasn't a failure. And I am really proud of what I achieved with this. It wasn't done to the best standard because of the time limits, but I pushed myself, and I think I made something really beautiful and really out of the box as well. And I am happy with what I did. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know what you think of the collection. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.